Welcome back to What's Next with Lacey, the podcast where I interview young professionals about their career journey so far. This week, I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with the amazing Kristina Latino, an independent artist manager operating her own company, Cornerscape Artist Management. We dove deep into the world of management, exploring Kristina's unique path to this role, what her day-to-day looks like, and of course, spotlighting her incredible artists, Alisa Amador, Ken Yates, and Mark Erelli. So check out our conversation for some music industry insights and inspiring advice from Kristina. Kristina, welcome to What's Next. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone I've mentioned that I am having you on has been like, this is going to be such an awesome episode. Like, I can't wait to listen. So not to put too much pressure, but I'm very excited for this.
Yeah, that is a bit of pressure. I'm like, I don't know. Today I spent my day doing CD inventory, as I mentioned. So I don't know how, but I'll try and make it sound cool.
That is cool. I think to a lot of people, that is cool. All right. So speaking of CD inventory, you are in the music business. You are currently working as an artist manager. And I do feel like managers, especially in the music industry, people kind of sometimes know what that means. Like Scooter Braun has put a name out for music managers. But what does that actually mean? What is a manager for a musician?
It's a great question. And it's actually something that I love to talk about because I feel like the music industry is bizarrely opaque in terms of what are the roles, what does an artist team look like? And certainly, I worked in the industry for a few years before someone encouraged me to head towards artist management. And at that moment, I literally was like, I don't get it. I give them advice and then they pay me. Like, what does it mean? And it is really hard to get a sense for like what artist management is. So yeah, happy to talk about it. But basically, as an artist manager, you are the musicians or the band's closest business collaborator. So, a simple way to put it might be like you help run the business. But what that means to me, and in my case with my roster, are things like you're helping build the artist team. So as the manager, you're pretty involved with all elements of their business, but there are other roles on the team that are much more focused on specific jobs. So for example, like the booking agent on the team would have a territory and they're responsible for booking and routing tours, negotiating contracts and deals. And they're very focused on the live space and they make their money through income through live performance. You would have a distributor, kind of the company that gets the music up onto Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, what have you, a label that might help underwrite the creation of new music and market that music, a publicist that would help promote that music in digital and print media. They typically would come on for, an album cycle, a radio promoter who is similarly promoting that music in the radio format that it fits in, and a lawyer, the list goes on and on and on. And as the manager, you are in charge of kind of assembling that team and quarterbacking that team, making sure that everyone is updated, that when you're on an album cycle, everyone knows kind of the major marketing drivers. What are the good things that happen that week? Are we all telling the same story? What are the artist priorities? And you are simultaneously strategizing kind of a long-term vision for that artist's career growth and also handling, the problems that come up or the opportunities that come up on the day-to-day.
That is wildly impressive and sounds like a lot of work. On that note, though, what does a day look like for you? I'm sure in this industry, it probably looks different every single day. But what does an average day look like?
Honestly, like every day truly does look different. I think it depends a lot on where your artist is in their album release cycle. For example, if I have an artist who's putting out an album in 2 months, my day-to-day with them is going to look really different than if they're actively in the middle of a tour. So, sometimes I will be in the office, or often I'm in the office, and I'm handling things like, perhaps preparing and coordinating the announce of a big tour so that, all 20 of these venues announce these tour dates at noon ET on the Wednesday, and then the tickets go on sale at 9 a.m. on the Friday or whatever it is. You're just trying to coordinate a lot of things like that. So, I think like a lot of jobs, you're like deep in the emails.
Yeah.
But then, at the same time, you've got days like maybe your artist is performing on a television show. So you're up early with them, kind of coordinating the logistics on that, on their glam, on, making sure it sounds good, that they're comfortable, that they can give their best performance. Perhaps you're at, a conference like South by Southwest or Americana Fest or any number of other industry events to meet with and build relationships with kind of all those other roles that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, the days are really different.
Yeah.
But for me so far this year, I've got all of the artists I work with are going to be on headline tours in the fall. So that's going to be stressful.
Oh, gosh.
But one of them is actively in a release cycle. So it's been a lot of just kind of advocating for that new music, working a lot very closely with her publicity team and her label just to, maximize exposure for that new music. It's her debut. So yeah, a lot of hustling for opportunities there.
Very exciting. So what is your favorite aspect of this job?
There are a lot of parts of it that I love, but I think my favorite part of the job is probably getting to hear brand new songs that these incredible songwriters have written when they're in their earliest forms. Like one of the artists I manage is on a songwriting retreat this week, and he's sent me 4 voice memos over the last 36 hours with brand new song seeds that a few of them are really beautiful. And I feel pretty confident that at least a couple of them will be on his next record. So it's very rewarding, I think, to be able to be a creative partner in some ways as well. And not all managers do that, but I'm very, grateful that I've got a roster that does value some creative input from me. So yeah, I love kind of getting to hear those songs and then help figure out which of them make a record and, what kind of production might fit that content. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, gosh, early access. That's awesome. On the flip side of that, though, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of your job?
I would say the hardest parts are things like just so much is out of your control. And I think that can be really challenging. When you work in a creative industry, as a manager, I have a small roster. Right now, I just manage 3 artists. So it's easy for those 3 people to be my top priority. Whereas, when you're advocating for your artists at Spotify, for example, they have so much new music being funneled to them every day. Or even, their booking agents might have a roster of 20 artists, or their labels might have, maybe you manage a developing act, but the label has a bigger act putting a record out a week after them or something. So I think for me, the biggest challenge is trying to really keep in mind that sometimes the opportunity that you think man, this should be a slam dunk, that opportunity is not going to come through when you might want it to. And just continuing to push through, build more relationships, keep going, look for the opportunity and, find it's often that things that maybe disappoint me at one point turn into something good 3 years later. So I try and remember that, but it's definitely challenging when it's you invest so much of your time and your money into something that ultimately is not really yours. It feels like yours because you give your whole life to it, but it's not my name on those records. I didn't write those songs and I'm not on that stage. So there's a lot that's kind of out of your hands. And despite being a fierce advocate, and that can be scary. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely putting yourself on the line for so much, not just your artist, but the music and everything else. Yeah, I can definitely see that being really, really tough. Being an artist manager is something that people kind of know a little bit about. There are some famous artist managers. But in your opinion, what is something that you think people just would not expect about your job?
Oh man, that's such an interesting question. I think people would underestimate how much time it takes for an artist to grow. I think when you hear success stories, it's when an artist kind of takes off, it feels this artist, yeah, okay, they were writing songs maybe, but then they had this viral moment and now they're famous. And often, they've had a manager working with them for 6, 7, 8 years trying to build that audience and build that team and allow the artist to develop their craft so that when they do have that moment, they're ready for it.
Yeah.
I do think that people would, maybe an artist manager is someone who is perceived to be like kind of a bullshitter. Like you're out there like trying to talk up your artist and you're going to shows and you're shaking hands. But like so much of it requires really intense like detail management and a lot of persistence. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. Like I manage 3 exceptionally talented artists and certainly they're all growing and it's going, I would say like it's going great for all of them in a lot of different ways. But I mean, it's like you have to email everyone 3 times before you get a yes. Or maybe, I think about a time when I was trying to get one of these artists signed to a booking agency and a label at the same time. And there was a label we loved that was really interested. And there was an agent we loved who was really interested. But someone has to be the first one to say yes. And it just takes so much persistence to be like, here's another little great update. Like, or let's connect the dots. Like I'm going to tell this other person that you're interested and then you two can talk and you can make the jump together. And like trying to figure out, it's kind of a lot of, like I am not a therapist and I'm not a psychologist, but it's like, there's kind of a lot of human emotional intelligence that goes into it. That's really important.
I mean, you're pulling so many strings behind the scenes. And I do think that coming from an audience member, people don't see all those strings that need to be pulled, indeed, to make this career or make this moment happen. Yeah, I could totally see that people would just 100% take that for granted and just be like, wow, popped up randomly.
It's interesting that you use that phrase because I hear people use it a lot, but I feel like it doesn't sit quite right with me, honestly. Like I feel like the idea of like pulling strings, to me, it feels like, like you're the one who's in charge. And I actually feel like what makes me a good manager, noting that there are tons of ways to be a good manager, like everyone does it differently, which was also an odd lesson to learn. When I started, I was like, how do I do this? And people were like, oh, learn as you go. Like, okay. But, I feel like what makes me a good manager is that I try to, like, there's no swing too big. Like, I'm always happy to take a big swing for my artist. And like, I will show up boots on the ground, meet the people I need to meet and like tell them why the artist I represent is going to make their lives better. But it's not really pulling strings so much as it is just like helping people understand how this is going to also benefit them and why we can all win together. And it's identifying the people for whom that's true. Like for some artists, like I have an artist on my roster who really wanted to continue to own her master recording. So like, if that's where she's starting from, it doesn't matter if I can get like a big, great label to offer her a bunch of money if they're not going to let her own her music. Like that, it's a non-starter. So it's like, it's a lot about matching priorities, matching personalities, and then keeping people motivated. So I feel like it's kind of like coaching more than it is pulling strings in a way.
Yeah. Do you think though that also kind of aligns with, you mentioned how different people do this differently. Do you think the way that you do this aligns with who you are as a person and where your skill set lies?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I really love people. Like I love music and I love people and I love meeting people. And I think I respond best when I meet other people in the music industry who I sense are similarly have a fire to try and make things happen. I love working with kind of like values-oriented artists. And by that, I mean artists who know who they are as people and want to build careers that like firm that up, like they're not just looking for the biggest opportunities, they're looking for the right opportunities. And I think that in the long run is going to be so much more sustainable, like spiritually and financially, than if you're looking for, maybe a big payoff now that's going to burn you out. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No one-hit wonders on your roster.
Exactly.
With that in mind, though, what are you looking for when you are building a roster? Obviously, they have to be talented and be able to make music, but you mentioned values. Like, what else is important to you when you are looking for clients?
There are two things that I look for. One is actually, this was kind of like the best piece of advice I think I ever got from another manager. Was I was talking to a manager at a great management company called Good Harbor, and he asked me that question. And I forget what I said. I think I said something about I love lyrics and I look for really good lyricists. And he said to me, and I said, what do you look for? And he said, I only sign artists who are the only people who can do what they do. And it literally changed the way I thought about my career. And I think back to it all the time with gratitude. Thanks, Ben Levin. But yeah, now that is what I look for now. It's like an artist who is the only one who can do what they do. And it makes it so easy to talk about them. It makes it so easy to support their music. And it makes it easy for them to stand out, which is wonderful. And then the other thing that I look for is an artist who's not afraid of social media. Real talk.
Very, very fair. I mean, that's so important in this current era. Yeah. I'm guessing that means that there are artists that you've come around who are like, no, I won't do social media.
It's not that they won't do it. And I am sure that any artist on my roster would be fine with me saying this. But like, I manage some artists who have complicated relationships with social media, as so many entertainers do. I don't think that it's uncommon at all. But I do think that it is a really essential tool to building an audience and to maintaining creative control over your future, it's the only way that a big artist can speak directly to their audience without going through a team, And because of that, I think I've come to value it even more than I did a couple of years ago. I think a couple of years ago, I would have said, if the music is amazing, then it's fine. Like we can find someone to hire to do the social media. And of course you can get people to help and support with socials. But I do think that having an artist that sees social media as a communication tool and feels comfortable with that is something that I'm really keen to add to my roster next.
Well, I mean, then clearly, like with those requirements, with you feeling like you need someone who is the only one who can do what they can do, like you clearly are going to find some very, very special artists.
I mean, I hope so. I've been like vaguely looking for like a year and haven't found the next one yet.
I feel like that's what makes it better. Then when you do find that person, then indeed, like you said, like you can be their greatest champion and it'll be so much easier because you did spend that time. I do want to mention that you are working from Boston, which I feel like is very unique in this industry. It's not LA, it's not New York, it's not Nashville. How does that make your experience as a manager different?
I definitely think it would be easier to do my job if I lived in LA. But, I grew up in Massachusetts. My husband grew up in Boston. We have really deep roots here and we've got a great airport. And I feel like, more and more, I'm not too worried about it. I mean, maybe it means that I travel a little bit more, but it comes with its benefits too. I mean, when I'm in LA every few months, it's like, people who maybe it would be harder to meet up with if I lived there because it's like, oh, we could do it any old time. It's like, I'm here this week. It can almost be easier to just like schedule a bunch of catch-ups and meetings when you are traveling. And then it also prompts me, I think, to get on the road with my artists more, which is so essential. I think really deeply understanding the live show and deeply understanding the way that audiences are connecting with your artist. You have to see it live and it changes, it changes as the music changes and as they grow and develop. So I appreciate that. I think being based in Boston pushes me to be on the road a lot instead of like just being like, oh, everyone comes through LA. I'll see them when they come here.
I want to now turn to your journey to being a manager. And I want to start with just your general interest and love for music. Where does that come from? And was there always a genre that you particularly liked? Then when you were deciding to become a manager, were you like, I want to work in this specific space? Where does just your love and passion for this space come from?
I think like a lot of people, my initial love for music came from singing as a kid. I grew up kind of singing and doing a lot of musical theater. I've left my performing days in the past now.
Maybe you'll be your own next artist.
Yeah, right. Actually, this is a real fun fact. One of the artists I manage, her name is Alisa Amador. She has her debut full-length album coming out this week. So I suppose it'll be out by the time this podcast is out.
Yes, it will. Check it out.
I do sing background vocals deep in the mix on one track because she needed a bunch of friends. There's like one song that has a bunch of friends who like group sing a chorus at the end. And I did participate in that. So it's just, yeah, it was like such a fun little treat. An Easter egg.
An Easter egg, exactly. Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I'm going to be like extra carefully listening, being like, which one is Kristina's voice?
I played it for my mom and was like, do you hear me? And she was like, what? No.
That's so funny. I'll say that I can hear you just to say.
Thank you. But anyways, yes, I loved music growing up, loved theater, musical theater growing up. And then honestly, I feel like this is so niche, but I actually bet plenty of other people had this experience. I saw the movie Josie and the Pussycats and just loved the soundtrack. And these movies had these like amazing like pop punk soundtracks, and I loved them. I played them so much. And I just always, I don't know, I always liked music more than anything else. And as I grew up, I thought maybe I would want to work in musical theater. And then I thought maybe I would want to work in pop music. But really, I mean, what happened was after graduating school, I got a job at a small Boston venue as a sound engineer. And I got trained there to engineer shows. So I was working there several nights a week, kind of doing sound and managing the venue. And just really got to see, it feels crazy to say now, but I really didn't know even then that there is a really robust ecosystem of working artists who make their living as full-time musicians in this country, but who are not household names. And they're making incredible music and they're touring, internationally in these kind of small venues. And it just really opened my eyes. I was like, oh my God, like there are so many ways to do this and to work in music. And that's kind of how I got started.
So what did you study in college, and has that helped you in your music career?
I studied art history. I do think that the general kind of lesson of spending time with art, there was kind of this like ethos in the department about, if you're looking at a painting, if you're looking at a piece of art, you can't just spend a minute with it or 20 seconds with it. You have to spend, 10 minutes staring at the canvas, and you're going to start to see things that you didn't see before. And honestly, I hated that as an art student. I was like, I'm so bored looking at this canvas. But I feel that way about music, listening to a song. It's like, especially when you're in the album creation stage and maybe I'm giving mix notes. It's like you're listening to the composition and the lyrics, but you're also listening to the mix, you're listening to the EQ, you're listening to the vocal performance, you're listening to the breaths. And I think that kind of like lesson has stuck with me in a positive way, even though I'm glad to be in the venues more than in the museums.
Yes. I mean, honestly, I can't judge. I was a history major who went into entertainment. So I'm like basically on the exact same level as you. I so agree that these kind of humanities subjects do just have transferable something others that can help you with your entertainment career. You mentioned that you worked at this venue as a sound engineer and in this operations capacity. Can you talk us through that in a bit more detail about like what that actually looked like?
Yeah. So I worked for this very small nonprofit venue for just about 2 years. So not very much time, but in that time, because it was such a small organization, I was able to kind of grow my role several times over. So, at first, when I was an engineer and a manager for the club, that would look like, arriving around 3:30, the band that was playing that night would arrive, you would help them load in, you would set up the mics on the stage, you would run sound check, you would make sure the band was comfortable and had what they needed. You would, start the night with the box office manager and the kitchen, you would open the doors, you would run sound for the show. And then after the show, you would, settle up with the band, pay them, break down the stage, close up for the night. It was a pretty small staff. So, I mean, it was like super hands-on.
Yeah.
And then over time, I took on a full-time role in the nonprofit office as well. So then I was doing kind of club operations and a little bit of nonprofit development for the organization. And that was really fun. It was like, helping make the calendars and schedule folks and all that. And yeah, I got to know a lot of musicians that way. I think this is jumping back a bit, but you asked about like, what music did I like when I was growing up? And is that kind of what made me like, do I manage those types of artists?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I feel like the music that I most loved growing up and most listened to is like pop music, punk music, kind of like, loud rock music. But working at this venue, Club Passim, it's a very kind of singer-songwriter and folk music forward venue. So as a manager, that's really the path that I got started on was, my earliest management clients were very much in the folk space. I still manage one of them today. His name's Mark Erelli, incredible, like multi-hyphenate type of artist. He's a producer. He's produced like a couple of albums for Grammy winners.
Wow.
He's a sideman guitarist. He's a performer himself. He's a low vision artist. He's losing his eyesight. So we do a lot of advocacy work. He's a writer, and managing his career is so rewarding because it's like we always get to be really creative about what we're thinking about and what we're growing and all that. And then, yeah, I manage another artist kind of in the indie space. His name's Ken Yates. He's a Canadian artist out of Toronto and just like such a vibey, incredible lyricist. And then Alisa Amador, who is more in the kind of alternative pop meets Latin folk. She does something, jumping back, she's like the only artist who does what she does. Yeah. And, she's funky and feminist and sensitive and a little jazzy, and her music's incredible. So I feel very lucky now that I think the roster I have, they're all great songwriters, but their music sounds quite different.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, now that I've been managing for, it's been, I guess, 7 and some change years. And I finally feel like, like I love my songwriters so much, but the next step for me, like I am looking to maybe find like a punk band or a rock band or something that does add, a nod to that other part of my musical love as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I told you this, but Mark Erelli was on my Spotify Wrapped last year, and
yes,
all 3 of your artists are probably going to be on my Spotify Wrapped this year. Like, biggest supporter over here. But going back to your experience at Club Passim, do you think, you mentioned also that you are really giving notes on your artist's work and like specific technicalities. Do you think doing that specific sound engineer work has helped you be able to give notes to your artists?
Oh, definitely. I'm sure it also makes me annoying as hell when I'm on tour with my artists. Cause like, if we're not carrying a front of house engineer with us, it's like, if you're using the house engineer at different rooms, many of them are fantastic. And I am not looking to disparage the work of any sound engineer, but sometimes people just make choices that are not what your artist wants. Like they'll put on way too much reverb, or they'll not balance the band well. And as a former sound engineer myself, and as someone who cares greatly about how the band is perceived, I sometimes have to gently be like, hey, can we try adjusting the mix like this? And most people are great about it, but I think some people are like, get the manager out of here.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. You are also now on the board of this nonprofit, right?
Yes.
Why did you stay involved? What are you doing with them now?
Oh man, I love this venue and this organization. So yeah, it's a Boston-based nonprofit venue. And so after I left working there, I actually came back about a year later as a consultant to produce the 60th anniversary concert for they had been in business for 60 years. And we put on just this huge, beautiful show that brought back artists who had gotten their start there or played there. People like Joan Baez was there. Josh Ritter was there. Just like all of these incredible artists. And it was so fun. So I kind of stayed in touch with them by helping them put that show on. And then a couple years later, and then of course, I live in Boston and I go there a lot. All of the artists, not all of my artists, but Mark plays there. multiple times a year in different configurations. Alisa, they were so instrumental in helping her get her start and develop when she was a college student, just kind of developing her craft. The first time she sold out a headline show was at that venue. It's like they put one show on sale and it sold out that day, and they added another one the next day and it sold out, and they added a third show and it sold out. And just seeing the way that they helped her develop, that's, I think, what this venue does best, is like supporting artists early in their development when they're still playing to rooms of, something like 100 people, and giving them a space where they can hone their craft and grow. And then, when we were able to sell those 3 shows out, it's really easy to go down the street to a bigger venue and say, hey, we're doing at least 300 tickets in this home venue, in this town. Like, can we bump up to your 600 seat venue and, see what we can do?
Yeah.
So it's very important to me, the way that they help artist development. And as a manager, obviously, that's what I'm doing, is artist development. So when I was invited to join the board, it just felt like an incredible way to, I hate when people say give back. Like, it's not, I don't, it's like a little bit giving back, but it's also just, our country does not have enough small venues. It doesn't have enough infrastructure for helping new artists go the first 10 miles. The first 10 miles are the hardest to run.
Yeah.
And it matters to me that a place like Passim is run by this incredible staff, and that they have a board of people who really care to support them. Yeah. So I'm very happy to volunteer on that board.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. I want to now talk about specifically your management journey. So let's start with, what was your catalyst moment to make the jump to be a manager? And not only were you making the jump to be a manager, you were also starting your own company and being a manager. As far as I'm aware, that's how your journey kind of played out.
So I left my job at Passim and I took another job. And suffice it to say, it just wasn't a very good fit for me. It was like very admin heavy. It was very far from music. I thought it was going to be like, a much closer to music and the arts than it ended up being. So I got this other job and I was not very fulfilled at it. So I started freelancing on the side, taking jobs with artists who I had met at Club Passim, and they were hiring me for a bunch of random projects. Things like, one of my favorites was, I planned like a pub crawl meets music festival, this like with a local band in Boston, where we would have people, go to the first location, and then we would kind of shuttle them between a couple of locations with drinks at each and snacks at each, and there would be a band waiting, and like, it was just really fun.
That's so fun.
Thanks. Yeah. So we did, stuff like that. And I was freelancing doing sound engineering and event production. But, I was also just exploring, trying to grow my skill set. And eventually I was offered a freelance gig that was about 20 hours a week and would require me to leave this other job if I wanted to take it. So that was kind of the moment where I thought, can I do this? And at the time that I started my company, I thought that what I was doing was starting a live events company, basically. That shifted fairly quickly. But for the first 2 years, I was doing a mix of kind of creative event planning and artist management. I wasn't even calling it artist management then, artist services, really. But Mark Erelli, who is on my roster, hired me to help him with a crowdfunding campaign for a record that he wanted to make. And we loved working together. It went really well. And we kept kind of working on projects together. And then, about 6 months after that, he said, you should think about being an artist manager. If you want to try being my manager, like, we should try that. And at first, honestly, I was like, no, thank you. Because I really didn't understand what a manager was.
Yeah.
And I also, it was very hard for me to conceive of going from working in events where you're giving an artist a job, they come, they do what they love, and then you give them money at the end of the night, to this really kind of amorphous job where, like I said at the beginning, I literally was like, I don't get it. I like give you my opinion and I take money. Like it didn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
Of course, now, many years later, knowing what I know, I deeply believe that a good manager is essential to an artist's career success, and that if you are doing your job well, you are generating, more financial success for that artist than you are taking. So, I feel good about it now, but it was definitely a big cognitive shift for me. And yeah, at first I tried to just keep doing projects with Mark, but eventually I went to a music festival and conference for him. And I was trying to find him a label, and no one would meet with me because I wasn't any of the jobs that they recognized. Like, they were like, "Are you his manager?" I said, "No." They said, "Are you his agent?" I said, "No." They said, "Are you his publicist?" I said, "No." I was like, "I'm his projects guy."
I'm a helper. I just kind of exist.
So I got back from that event and we were debriefing, and I was like, "All right, screw it. Like, I'll be your manager. Let's try it for 6 months and we'll see how it goes." Yeah. Starting with Mark as my first roster artist it's such a dream because, like, Mark is a freaking dream to work with. He's just so organized and such a good person in addition to being very talented. But he was also more of a mid-career artist. Like, he already had a booking agent. He had been on a label with whom he still had a very positive relationship. And all of these people, when Mark said, "Hey, I have a new manager, but she's brand new," were super willing to take me under their wing and answer all of my very basic questions and show me the ropes. So I kind of started learning that way. And then as I got my feet under me, started thinking about, all right, how do I expand this? Like, do I want to really be a manager? And yeah, 7 years later, I finally feel really good about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's the kind of job that's changing all the time and you're learning all the time.
Yeah.
So that makes it fun.
Gosh, it's awesome that this artist gave you this shot. Like, I feel like some artists wouldn't probably take a chance like that on a brand new manager. That's incredible. What an amazing origin story. So then, why not a bigger company? Once you got your feet underneath you, did you ever consider going and taking your artist to a bigger company? Or were you like, "I want to stay, I've offered them this service now with me, with this small company, I'm going to stay working for myself"?
It didn't occur to me that I could go to a bigger company until, I don't want to say too late, because it's never too late. And I expect there could be a time in my future where I will join another company. But the challenge, so when you become an artist manager, I think there are kind of like two main paths. One is the path I took, which is, the path of being an independent manager, where you are growing your own company, growing your roster, doing it all. And I suppose if something goes really, really well, if someone really takes off, the payoff there can be much higher. But you don't have a lot of the benefits that come with being in a bigger management firm. I mean, you don't have someone who is specifically, a tour marketing person or a socials person or a graphic designer. Like, all these management companies have different staffing configurations, but typically, they share resources to offer a lot of the services that are kind of a heavier lift. So the way to journey into one of those companies, a very typical path, I would say, is to start as a day-to-day manager. And that's kind of like an entry-level position where you are working with a senior manager on an artist, where perhaps that senior manager is doing a lot of the kind of strategic stuff that we discussed earlier. But the day-to-day manager might be the one that's like on the road with them more, kind of handling elements of the tour business or the merchandise business. But you're really being guided by that more experienced manager, and you're focused on kind of being that person who's on call all the time to the artist and handling different elements of the job. So, and then, you can grow, you're learning, you're growing your skills. Eventually, if you're a great day-to-day, the company will probably let you start signing your own artists, perhaps in partnership with one of those senior managers, even perhaps independently. And you can grow to become a senior manager yourself. I think the interesting spot that I'm in now is like I have too much experience to go in as, like a day one, day-to-day.
Yeah.
But I don't have a roster at this point that commands enough to go in as a senior manager at a lot of companies. I mean, I don't know, maybe that's wrong, right? Like, I haven't really tried to merge into a bigger company. I have talked about merging and joining forces with other independent managers.
Yeah.
There are several managers who I'm, close with and collaborate with and trust very deeply. And we've talked about what it would look like to merge our rosters and our companies. And certainly that's another path.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really interesting, all the different ways you can do it. And I love kind of the culture of trust that I have with my roster. But yeah, never say never. Like I think I could be very happy joining a company and having coworkers again. Oh my God. And like, that's the thing I miss the most is having coworkers, true coworkers. And yeah, I think it could be great to have the kind of support that comes with a company.
It's so interesting how like there's so many iterations of being a manager. I think this is probably one of the careers that I've interviewed that is the most amorphous in what it's like and what it can be like. I know you had a different vision for why you started your own company, but did you feel prepared? Like, I feel like starting your own company is such a big step and can be really scary and a really intense process. Like, how did you know that that was the right thing to do? And how did you feel prepared?
Honestly, I feel like I've always been a fairly confident person, for better or for worse. That doesn't mean I don't have like intense insecurity about certain things. I do, but in general, like, I don't know. I think I generally believe in myself, which is helpful. But then I also, when I started to think about it, I started putting money aside to save for those first several months when I was trying to build up business. And I also talked to my mom, and my mom said she would cover my rent for the first 6 months that I did this. And that is something that like was
a game changer.
A game changer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I was like, great. If my mom is paying my rent, thank you, Mom, for 6 months. That is 6 months of time where I can work as hard as I can. And all I have to figure out how to buy is like food. Yeah. And it was, I mean, it just made everything possible. So I'm super grateful for that. But yeah, I think it was a mixture of like that familial support and then just generally the confidence of like, I was like, I'm in my young 20s.
Yeah.
I have people who already were asking me like, hey, do you want to do this project? And I was like, if not now, when? Just give it a try. And I do think, with the knowledge I have now, not that I would necessarily go back and change it, but I do think that if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I might go back and tell myself to go into a bigger company as a day-to-day manager, in my young 20s. I think like that would have been such a good experience. But the experiences I've had growing Cornerscape are also just like so fun and rewarding. And I've put on in those early years, I put on some really fun events that I was very proud of. And now I love being friends with other independent artist managers. It's just the best community. I'm in kind of like an independent artist managers collective that has, like 10 others who are working with just incredible artists. And I recently formed this like women identifying managers text thread with a bunch of other women managers, some of whom are at companies and some of whom are independent. And I think just like, the pride of being able to put out art that you super believe in, see an artist go from day one, like Alisa's album's out in 2 days, and I've been with her for 4 years, like from step one, built the whole team, like went with her into the studio, went through mixed revisions and like multiple mastering engineers. And to get to the point we're at, like this summer, looking ahead to this summer where she's going to be, at Newport Folk and Hardly Strictly and opening for Lake Street Dive and on television or national TV debut. Like, it's so cool to be like, oh, we did that.
Yeah.
Like, that was you and me and a lot of late nights. And it's funny because it's still only in many ways the first step, like most people who listen to this will be like, oh, I've never heard of that artist. And hopefully they'll look her up. And, I think a lot of people are going to learn her name in the coming years, but it's really cool to get to work with someone so closely from the jump and really see them grow. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it clearly has very much worked out for you already. So I feel like it's a very impressive thing that you have managed to do. It is almost time to wrap up, but before I let you go, I definitely need to get some advice from you. I want to start with, what advice do you have for getting into the music industry in general?
My biggest piece of advice is just to start independently. And I think that's not to say stay independent, but I think one of the beautiful things about working in music, or I imagine in entertainment, is there aren't really any prerequisites. You don't need any special degrees. You don't need anything except like a lot of hustle and, follow through and passion. So I think, there are more talented artists than there are capable managers. And if you're someone who's interested in getting started in the music industry, I would tell you to open TikTok or Instagram Reels, like find a band that you think is cool and offer them some help and really just start to figure it out. Like show up, go to concerts, go to events as much as you can, and don't be afraid to introduce yourself and meet people, because everyone is like, anytime someone tells me they're interested in being a manager, I'm psyched.
Then speaking of being a manager per se, what advice do you have for people who may already be managers or at least or maybe early in their career as managers? Like what advice would you have for them?
To advocate for yourself as well as for your artists. I think the managers I know who are day-to-day managers in bigger companies who are maybe like 23, 24, they're super capable people, but because they're in that day-to-day role, they're not always given the opportunity to work on the strategic development piece of management that is ultimately like the most important. Mm-hmm. So I would say if you're early in a management career, really like advocate for yourself as much as possible to be included in those conversations, and be honest with your artists always, even when it is hard or inconvenient or scary. Yeah. There are times when artists need a pep talk, and there are times when artists need a reality check, and it is your job to be like super honest with them and remember who is the leader. And, the artist at the end of the day is the reason we all have jobs, and they're the reason that we're all doing this, and they're in the driver's seat. So yeah, I would say those things. Advocate for yourself and advocate really hard for your artists, but also be honest with them always.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And then finally, for you, Kristina, what's next?
Oh, well, this week, this album release, but more broadly, I'm excited to add a fourth artist to the roster. Like I mentioned, I've been kind of, poking around and having conversations for the last year, trying to find exactly the right match. It goes both ways, right? Like the artist might not think you're the right match. So it's hard to find like exactly the right fit, but yeah, excited to try and find a band that adds something a little different to round out my roster. And I am actually, I have been talking to some other managers about working together. I've been talking potentially to some companies about, what it would look like to maybe join there. So continuing to kind of explore those options and just celebrate music and celebrate the community of the music industry.
I love it. Is there anything else you want to plug while you're here?
Yeah. Hell yeah. What kind of a manager would I be if I didn't take the opportunity? But yeah, the three artists I manage are Ken Yates. He's freaking great. Mark Erelli, Erelli, and Alisa Amador, Alisa Amador. Find them on your streaming platform of choice. They're all on tour this fall. And yeah, if you're interested in management or music, hit me up on Instagram. I'm findable and always love to, like I said, I love meeting people. So enjoy the music and hope to meet some of you out there in this great wild world.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I really, really appreciate it. And I cannot wait to see where all your artists and you go with your careers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was so fun. And yeah, just love the podcast.